All right, so here's a few news articles. There's a lot of news about Trump these days. Trump has his lawyer, Genova, said he wanted to kill Chris Krebs, who was the cybersecurity expert who resisted Trump's statements that the election had been hacked and rigged. And so Trump responded by firing him via Twitter. And now his lawyer wants to see him killed, or said he should be like drawn and quartered and shot. And he has said he's going to explore legal remedies to like sue these people for calling for his execution. And this is far from the first person that Trump teams wants to kill. And so this is a pretty dramatic thing from an executive in Georgia saying that they, Haffenberger, the guy in charge of elections in Georgia, and now has armed guards protecting him. His wife has been threatened. His family's been threatened. And now random people who are just workers handling the data, copying it from one machine to another, having to do with the election data, are being attacked by Trump supporters or threatened by Trump supporters, which is what everyone's saying. I mean, Trump is trying to pull off a coup, telling people that the election was fraudulent, and that crazy lawyer Jenna Ellis is up there saying that people need to take extreme action, and the conservative talk radio psychos are saying that we should have like people do extreme drastic things to put Trump back in. And they're sending Trump down to Georgia to say something about the voting, because the Republicans in Georgia are saying they're not going to bother voting in the runoff because they believe Trump that the election is all rigged and the machines are all fixed. So anyway, it's a slow motion coup and a collapse of the American democracy system that we're watching here. But an increasing number, it seems to have reached the point where an increasing number of Republicans are finally speaking out against Trump, including Bill Barr about 2 hours ago, who's been in hiding for a couple of weeks, came out and said he did an investigation and there was no fraud, there was no fake votes. And so this is something that I've heard every Democrat screaming about for 2-3 weeks, is that the Republicans should be resisting Trump, which is pretty hard to do, since 80% of Republican voters believe everything Trump says. They really believe the election was rigged. And so any Republican lawmaker speaking out against him is basically having to quit on the spot, I think, because they'll be opposed by their constituents. But I don't think Barr is elected. All the rest of them are going to get fired soon anyway, when Biden comes in. Anyway, so it does seem very clear what Trump is doing. He's doing the same thing he always done. This is all just a scam. He does things to get press. He uses the press to make money. He's made $170 million on press claiming he was abused. Before this, he claimed that Obama wasn't born here and he ran a fake university. And so this is his latest scam to make money he was like Rush Limbaugh, getting on the radio saying terrible things and get people to send you money. So it's not that different than the hellfire and brimstone preacher when I was a kid, but it is harmful to the nation. Anyway, it's dramatic to see it going on. And the other Republicans are beginning to get very concerned, because obviously Trump is going to be out soon, and they're going to be left with a poisoned electorate that does not really support the Republican Party. And I read some analyses, and they said that the reason Trump won is because many Republicans felt very angry at the Republican establishment, and Trump ran as the rebel against the Republican establishment. Sort of like a lot of Bernie supporters felt very betrayed by the Democratic establishment when they kind of rigged it to put Hillary in instead of Bernie. So they were discovering that rather than Trump bringing out more people to join the Republican bandwagon, he's brought out a bunch of people, but they're not really happy to vote for other Republicans. And so they've sort of created a monster that is not really helping them. Anyway, and you see the money going, yes, the money is going to Trump's election fund, his reelection fund, which he typically uses just to spend on random things. That's one of the many financial crimes that he may be punished for, is he just uses the money that's supposedly going into his charities and into his election fund to just give to his children and spend on personal items and stuff. So yeah, it's pretty much going to him. And it's got nothing to do with getting him put back in. That's in the fine print. He sent 150 emails asking for money, and they all say, of course, in the fine print, all money up to like $7,500 you elect to me will just go into my general slush fund, and like after that, 75% of it will go to getting me to reversing the fraudulent election. So it's just a scam, but it's making a lot of money, and it's the same thing he's always done. what's amazing to me is so many Americans are falling for it, but he's very effective. Anyway, this one surprised me. I talked a few weeks ago about Coinbase. Had a big thing about how we're not going to have any more politics at work. And then it came out that that's because they have apparently been abusing the black people at Coinbase. And that's what they called politics at work, was the black people asking for fair treatment. And now the NASDAQ is proposing that they require diversity on the boards of companies to be listed on the exchange, or they'll delist them. And Goldman Sachs has declared that they are not going to they're not going to take companies public unless they have at least one diverse board member and 2 diverse board members within a couple of years. So I was surprised by this, because Coinbase's position was exactly what any business school would have told you up to at least a few years ago, is that the business of business is business, and you do not need to be making any political statements or taking any political position at business. In fact, you should stay out of all that and forget about being a do-gooder and just make money. But the tide seems to have turned, and these major establishment financial figures seem to be accepting that diversity is no longer an optional political statement, but something you really are going to need to be doing in modern business. So that's quite a change. Anyway, Libra is the cryptocurrency where Facebook will control all your financial transactions, which has massively failed. As you've heard David Gerard's talk on Saturday, he talked about that. So now they have changed their name to Diem, probably to sort of whitewash it and make it seem a little further from Facebook in the hopes that they can get it approved. This thing has pretty much been shot down by every financial regulator, because it is just a way for Facebook to take over world banking, and no government and no banking oversight board in any country is happy with that, because Facebook has such a bad reputation right now. So they might be able to fool people. I know one of the cigarette companies changed their name to Altera about 10 years ago, the same way, hoping to escape association with the nasty things the tobacco companies had done. Yeah, what's wrong with Zuck's Bucks? Yeah, the same thing. Anyway, we'll see what comes of that. Anyway, so we're up to 10 minutes after. So we're here. This is the next to last class. I have the last class here, and I'll talk about the next chapter, which is good, clean, fun, anti-disassembly. I haven't even written a quiz for it. I might write one and put it up, but if I do, it'll be extra credit. And then after that comes the final. But in that week, we also have these guest speakers that you can come to for extra credit if you like. I highly recommend it. The FBI and the cybersecurity policy advisor for the OMB will be here. And there's another one also the week before that on Monday. So come to these things. I highly recommend it. They're worth extra credit. You'll learn good things. This is Risk Intelligence, Director of Technical Risk and Intelligence at FireEye. So those will both be good things to do. And all right. And if you look at Canvas, there's an announcement listing how many points it takes to get a grade. So if people have been doing extra credit, they could very well have enough already to get an A. You do not need to take the final exam if you have enough points to get the grade you want. Your grade is simply determined by your total points, and the final exam is just points like any other. So nobody should be surprised about what they're getting, and you still have time to do extra credit things to improve your grade if you want to. Anyway, so let's talk about malware-focused network signatures, which are here. All right. So, oops, hit the wrong button, that doesn't work. All right. So if you want to control the network aspect of attacks, you can, of course, filter them. The first generation of firewalls did the same thing that routers do. They just look at things like port numbers, source address, destination address, and so on, and filter traffic by that. And that is a very weak form of traffic filtering. It will just stop things that are coming in on an unusual port, which is really not stopping attacks, it's stopping misdirected traffic. You can use DNS servers to stop more. And if you subscribe to services like OpenDNS, then they become the DNS resolver for your client machines. And when your client machines will click on something like a link in a phishing message that goes to a malicious server, they will recognize that and not resolve it to the server. So they will dynamically block malicious traffic, which is nice. And that's, you can also, they automatically do it. You can do it yourself. You can send things to a sinkhole where you send traffic to just a device that will throw it away. That's one option. And you can have proxy servers, which is what you typically do if you want to control access to the internet. You block certain domains, so you do not let anybody connect directly to the internet. They connect to your proxy, which then fetches web pages on your behalf, and you configure the proxy to not resolve things you don't want people going to, like malware domains, porn, games, or whatever you don't want people doing. These are common ways you control network traffic. These days, almost everybody has a layer 7 firewall, like a Palo Alto, that is very smart, that looks at the full contents of every packet. It can resolve things like BitTorrent, regardless of what port it's running on. And you can add IDS systems to your network, which will look for recognized malicious traffic, and an IDS will detect it and alert something. An IPS will prevent it by doing something like turning on an automatic firewall rule to block malicious traffic. And you can have proxies for email or web servers. And all these are common ways to limit the traffic on your network to try to stop the malicious traffic. And therefore, since almost everybody has a bunch of these devices running, when you're infected with malware, it has to sneak past all those devices to phone home. So you will have to detect the network traffic. We've done it in the project where you just run it in a virtual machine and watch the traffic. But a lot of malware, not most of it, but I consider an increasing number of it, is smart enough to detect when it's in a virtual machine or an analysis network. So you might want to run it in a real machine, in a real company environment where it's likely to actually do its malicious stuff rather than detect that it's suspicious in some way. And then you can watch it send traffic home to the command and control center server and send beacons to inform that server that it's under control, and perhaps send stolen data up there and so on. So you can passively monitor the traffic. And if you want to do this right, you connect a sniffer device to your network at layer 2 only. So it has an Ethernet address, but it does not have an IP address. It copies the frames at layer 2. And the reason you do that is because it cannot be detected. It cannot have you cannot send any traffic to the detection machine. It doesn't have an IP address. So there's no way for an external attacker to scan your network and detect it, or attack it and bring it down, or control what goes to it. So you can monitor traffic in a way that cannot be detected or prevented by the attacker, which is a nice thing to do. Then you'll have a record of what happened. Anyway, and that's part of operational security, when you prevent your defensive activities from alerting the attacker that you're on to them. So you'll see things on your network. You'll see bad domains being resolved. You'll see IP addresses that are not legitimate, that lead to, you can use things like open source intelligence services and discover that these IP addresses are known to be malicious. And you'll see GET requests going out there with something wrong with them, like this one has a strange user agent. Proper user agent is something like Mozilla and an Internet Explorer version or something like that. And this is just some strange series of letters that doesn't look right. So that's not a normal web browser doing that. All right. And so the attacker can identify you. One thing they often do is they do not send identical emails to everybody. They send a specific link to every person. It has a number in the link that's only used once, so they know who clicked it and they know who they sent it to. So if they send it to your company and then it's opened in another geographic area, that's bad. If it's opened on a home laptop and not a machine that's attached to that domain, that's also bad. If it's opened in a virtual machine, these are all clues they would get showing that that email was not really opened by the designated target. So anyway, they can also log infections, and another thing you can do is the same thing defenders do with the Think Canary. You put a domain in the malware, in the strings, for example, that is not in use. And now if you find somebody going to that domain, that means an analyst has opened that malware and run strings on it, and they're trying to figure out what the strings mean, because it would not be resolved by a real malware that was infecting someone. So that's cute. And these are all ways to trick you into revealing the fact that you caught them. So if you want to avoid getting caught, you can try using techniques to hide yourself. If you go behind Tor, then nobody can physically locate your machine, which is the point of it. But that's incredibly obvious. Everyone knows what the Tor exit nodes are, so they will know that you are in fact using Tor, which is not something anybody would normally do from a company. You can have a dedicated virtual machine with a different network on a shell or a VPN network. It won't look like a company machine, but it's another way to do it. Or you can use an ephemeral cloud machine for your analysis like we've been doing on Azure or Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud. These are various ways to hide where you are. They might tip off the bad guy, but they will not make it easy for them to tell where you are. And then you can just search about the domains of interest. Which if you did the Funk project, you will have seen this. You find some defacement activity going to a website, then you find the domain it came from, then you research it with search engines and you find out what it is known for. It's a domain with a bad reputation. The IP address it's on has a bad reputation, and you can see that. So you can search about the server, and that normally does not send any traffic to the server. But if you do click links and open a page that may be archived from the server, that will send traffic to the server. I was very upset when I discovered this. If you go to Google Cache, Google has copies of old copies of web pages. And when you open that page, the primary HTML of the page is coming from Google's server, but it then opens the images and such on the real server. So you are sending traffic to the real server, even when you were looking at what I thought was a cached copy. So that's rude. And that's an issue to be aware of. Just like it's not really safe to do much of anything with malware because it's very easy to accidentally activate part of the malware. It's not easy to look at a malicious website without sending some traffic to the malicious server. Now, of course, they might not be looking that carefully at the traffic, but I thought looking at a Google cache was completely sanitary and not going to expose me, and that was not really true. Anyway, so you can look at domain names that are malicious at online registries or IP addresses. There are blacklists for domains and IPs, and there are geolocation. You can tell where people are from the IP address, and that's why one common thing people do is they block whole nations. They block all China, for example. If you don't have any real customers in China, then a lot of that traffic is malicious. They block the Tor exit nodes and so on. These are things you can easily do to block, obviously, malicious traffic. If you use Whois and Dig, these are command line tools that will do DNS resolution and find out the owners of domains, but they do involve sending queries to online services, and those will include your IP address. And especially Dig will often send a signal all the way back to inside the malicious domain to find that server, because it's the ultimate source of information. So you might prefer to go to a website that will do it for you, like this, Domain Tools, and then the request does not come from your machine at all. So at least your location will not be exposed by looking someone up at one of these websites. And they also have historical records. This is how a lot of the online criminals got caught, like the people in Anonymous. They would do something like hack an FBI server and then post a bragging note with their fake name. And if people would just look for previous uses of those fake names, they would find it associated with websites. And then they would go here and see old DNS records from years ago before they were a criminal. So they were able to pretty easily track things back to an earlier time when that user was not protecting their identity, like when they were on competition game forums and such. That's why it's very hard to hide online. In principle, it sounds easy technically, but it just requires the discipline of a real military spy. You have to make a second identity, and you have to make absolutely sure that you never make any connection between your crime identity and your real identity. And that means you have to think in a mature way. You have to make a decision that I'm going to create a second identity and I'm going to hide that identity. And that's not the way it's usually done. Usually they start playing games, then they start cheating at the games, then they start hacking in something in a small way, and they do a little bit more and a little bit more. And they never really admit that they've decided to become a criminal and be hiding now and plan for that. They just sort of slide into it. And so there are trails leading back to the time when they were not thinking themselves as hiding. Yeah, we're searching for a cached website. Did Google redirect? No, it doesn't redirect me to a current website, but when I look at the cached version, it loads things like images from the real website. So even looking at the cached website involves sending traffic to the real website. That's why I felt very annoyed. I think I even put it on one of my quizzes. If you go to the Google, where do you go to load the page without sending any traffic to the criminal's website? Well, you go to the Google cache. That'll be fine. And it's not fine. I felt betrayed. But of course, Google does not make that cache for the convenience of people researching crime. The purpose of that cache is just when Google wants to index a page, they just harvest something like the first 2,000 characters from each page. And they look for keywords in that. That's all they do to populate their search engine. And then they store that for a period of time. That's all the cache is. It is not at all intended for this purpose. And it's a mistake to think that it is that sanitary. That's all Google cares about, is to harvest the keywords off it. Anyway, and so, by the way, I discovered something the other day. There was a website that was behind a paywall. You couldn't see it at all, Financial Times or something. And I found out somebody did this. You can go to archive.org and you can ask it to make an archive of a page, and then you'll see that without the paywall. So you can, anyway, that's not only a way to get around paywalls, but it means you can put things on archive.org, so there'll be a long-term copy of the page. You can't read just the Google output without revealing yourself. No, that's exactly the question, Jimmy. I thought as long as I didn't click on links, it wouldn't send any traffic back, but that is not true, because when they archive the page, they only archive the HTML. And when you view the page in a browser, the HTML tags, like the image tags, will make another GET request that will go to the malicious domain and load the image from there. So in retrospect, it makes sense, because all Google is looking for is keywords, but it was not what I thought I was doing, looking at an archived copy. Yeah. Anyway, so you can also do reverse IP and reverse whois lookups here to see domains that are related to other domains. And that helps a lot, because typically if there's a malicious server, that means probably it's either a bulletproof server somebody's paid for to put up malware sites, or they've compromised a server and they're putting up unauthorized pages on somebody's server. But in any case, they'll typically reuse it. So the same IP address and the same server will be used for many campaigns. And when you look at what other domain names are there, it'll be really obvious that it's a server involved in criminal activity. So you'll find multiple things going to the same IP address. You can check blacklists. So here I was looking up City College's, one of City College's addresses here, and it tells you who owns it. And you can then find all the related things. This is a whole group of City College servers, 147, 101. So you can find a whole bunch of them, and a bunch of them are not incredibly obvious, like Maps2 and Front Page and so on. Something called Old Fog at this time. I did this a few years ago. That's really a good thing. If you find an old server with a name like Old, that probably means it's running an old version of stuff and nobody's monitoring it. So if it's still live on the internet, that would be a good thing to attack. Anyway, that's why these services are quite useful for both an attacker and a defender, to find out what other sites are related to the one of interest. And so here's a DNS logger, which will collect DNS data without sending any queries. It just archives all the DNS traffic it sees going by some kind of public site and keeps a record of it. So you can resolve DNS to IP address without sending any traffic to what might be an enemy-controlled DNS server. Anyway, let's take a look at some Cahoots. 14A, sounds right. All right. I guess that's it. Might as well go. All right. Which one can redirect malicious domains to a sinkhole? Okay, that's a DNS server. You resolve it to an IP address that goes nowhere. All right, which device will filter traffic based on headers? That's what routers do. It's not really a security feature, it's just traffic control, really, like a red light and a stop sign is essentially all it is. Which device will log attacks but not stop them? Yeah, that's intrusion detection system. Good. All right, and which one is the central point of administration for a botnet? That's it, your command and control server. All right, which one will conceal the location of a host? Or will hide your location courtesy of the US military? All right. All right, Dell will probably have to tell me who they are. That might not be enough information. Stephen probably is. And Snip will definitely have to tell me who they are. If they, of course, there might be people at this point that don't care about points, but let's see. Dell does, good. All right, and I see Snip also good. All right, so back to here. All right, so more network countermeasures. So you can have Snort. Snort was the first intrusion detection system. And at the time, this came out decades ago, and people thought this was going to be great and end all hacking. Of course, it wasn't that great, but it is good. It's like antivirus for your network. So you write these rules, and then it just looks for some pattern of data in the packets. The headers, the size of the payload, connection state. Here's one that looks for from this home network to any external network. And it's going to send this message, malicious user agent, and then it's going to look. And if it sees a carriage turn line feed and then user agent colon WEFA7E, then it's going to regard that as malicious traffic, because this is the one we saw earlier that used this strange user agent. So this is a typical Snort rule. It looks for some flag in the data, and if it finds that, it will then record that you have this kind of traffic. So that's fine. And this is the standard format for these network agents. Snort is the first product, and it set the standard for how to write these rules. So that's fine, but the problem is, it turns out that's not a very good rule, because if you run the malware many times, it has a variety of these user agents that always start with WE, but then this part changes. So that rule is too specific. It's going to have a lot of false negatives, machines that are actually infected, but are not detected by that rule. So this is why you have to have better analysis to find better indicators of compromise. So you can decide how much you want to analyze. Now, one thing is to have full coverage of functionality. So you'd like to somehow trick your malware into doing everything it does by perhaps sending commands from a fake command and control server, or you want to do static analysis to understand how it works in a greater detail. Of course, you can spend forever analyzing malware, so you have to decide how much you want to do. At a service analysis, you just find initial indicators like you might find in a sandbox, where you do the simple things. You run it and watch the network traffic, look for registry keys, look for files, you run strings, a few other simple things to just find simple indicators of compromise. And that might be good enough, but then you can try to track all the communication methods, try to recreate the operation of it, like a fake command and control server. And then code coverage would be where you understand the entire thing. You thoroughly analyze it and understand all the code. Of course, that's a lot of work, and normally it's not worth putting that much work into it. So Your attackers will try to sneak the traffic out of your network, as we've seen in the projects. So they'll use HTTP or HTTPS or DNS, and they'll send some kind of periodic traffic home to indicate to the command and control server that this machine is under control, and to fetch commands from the command and control server. And they can then respond to those commands, run commands on your network, harvest data, sneak the data out, and so on. So you'll find funny traffic like this, like a user agent that's all full of base64 encoded junk. That's, of course, not a real user agent, but it will typically pass through your network defenses as apparently an acceptable HTTP request, and there's some kind of encoded data going out. You can put any kind of junk in there. And so that's some malware used strange user agent strings. And of course, if you do that, that makes it easy to block. Here's what a proper user agent looks like. There's really only a few dozen common ones, and they just match the browser versions of common browsers. So anything that doesn't match a known browser is probably malicious. And so your malware might alternate between a few of them. It's another way to go. All right, and what they do is they send an HTTP request to a malicious web server, and the web server will reply with a real web page, so it looks like legitimate traffic, but somewhere in that web page will be something hidden, like in this comment, with a command to the malware. So it'll have some kind of code word like adserv saying, here's the command for malicious activity, and in this is the encoded instructions. So this will pass any kind of automated analysis, and it'll look like just a fine web page of some kind, but it's in fact a malicious activity. So if your host is behind a network address translation or proxy server, then its IP address won't be much use to you because it'll just be a local IP address. So typically malware will assign its own identifier to every host, which it can use to issue commands to that host. It will create the identifier by doing something like taking the IP address or the MAC address or the local host name and combine that into some kind of unique identifier. All right, here's a malware beacon. Just looks a bunch of long, apparently random numbers. Here's real traffic from real malware beacon that's just going to resolve these apparently folder names or file names on a web server. So this is not a real file name on a web server, but it's a web server request that is formatted like a web server request. And so when you write the malware, you typically write it using normal Visual Studio or some other normal production tool, and there are different ways to do it. WinSock was the original Windows networking API. This is a low-level networking that does the standard Unix-based network commands straight from Berkeley Unix. So you send and receive, you open a socket, then you connect, then you send and receive on a socket, and so on. So here you have to do everything. Handshake yourself, building the packet, character by character to send out the data, the way we do in the violent Python part in 124. So this is the old-fashioned way to do networking, and it places the most burden on the programmer. So this is the original way network programming was done. Nowadays, most of the time, you use the WinINet API. This gives you nice commands for things like internet read file, internet write file, HTTP send requests. So one high-level command will do everything for you and send it off. So this is the way a normal developer would write code to use standard network protocols easily. There's another one called COM interface that has things like URL download to file for certain purposes here. These are Windows available APIs. This is the lowest level and not that commonly used by modern software. So malware might use internet open and HTTP request, and then it would sneak data out. So it will do something like have a get host name, use some kind of random thing, and the tick count is the number of clock ticks since the machine started up, something like that. So just a way to create a semi-random identifier of this machine so it can tell when it's being addressed, and the server can keep track of how many hosts it has under control. So you can get random data, hard-coded data, and information received from the server. These can all be what's going to use to create the network beacons. All right, if WinSock requires you to manually generate the packets one by one, and that makes it very likely that the traffic will not exactly be correct. It will have some subtle mistake, misspell a word or something funny about the timing. It will be possible to distinguish this from the ordinary traffic generated by the high-level APIs. And so here's one common way to make the URI random bytes, host name, time from tick count, just to create a pseudo-random identifier, which will be included in all requests from that bot, so the server knows which bot is sending that data out. So you could, in fact, make a regular expression. If you analyze the malware and you discover that's how it makes the identifier, you could look for exactly that identifier. 4 random bytes, the first 3 letters of a host name, time from tick count. So you could make a signature that looked for exactly that with this kind of nonsense: carriage return, line feed, referrer, then I'll hit get, then this is the regular expression for all that garbage. So many characters drawn from this set, so many numbers drawn from that set. This is one possible way to do it, but this is a mistake. When you write these overly complicated rules, it slows down your IDS. It has to do too much processing on every packet, and also it's very likely to be too picky and miss some modified traffic. So, this is why it might be a lot smarter to just look for something simple like this add serve. Anyway, there's many ways to do it, and it's a question of your situation, what the best way to do it is. Anyway, so here's parser that just looks for the ida-prograph or parsing function. It's going to check the initial characters, see if it starts with this, then it's going to find text, then it's going to look for the end of the comment mark, take the stuff in the middle, and then compare it to something like add serve, and it's going to look for certain commands here, like long sleep, run a command, connect to a port, and it's going to turn it to base 64, and those are the simple commands. So this is the outline of the code that does that. And so here's various signatures you could use. You could look for add serve followed by common commands. And if you include the command part, then it'll only work if those commands remain exactly the same. So, it might be better to have something simpler, like just add serve followed by any kind of characters that look like base 64. That would probably be enough to suggest that it's infected, although there's some possibility that might happen elsewhere. And there's various other ways to do it. You can look for a common string like the command part of the command executor just somewhere within 100 characters of the start of a comment. Would be another way to do it. These are smarter ways to write rules. And you're always trying to hit the sweet spot. This is what antivirus engines do. You're trying to write something that will have a high probability of detecting malicious activity and have a low probability of firing on innocent activity, and also not cost too much processing time. So here's general signatures. I'll look for user agent. If there's an accept string and no referrer, that would be a clue, except most browsers would put in a referrer. And if the malware forgot to add the referrer to their synthetic GET request, that would be a clue. This is what the Al-Qassam cyber army did. The people that brought down American banks with 14 waves of attacks about 8 years ago. There was a YouTube video that they decided was insulting Mohammed, so they decided to punish American banks until they had harmed them with enough dollars to balance their estimate of how much the insult was worth. And at first they just sent GET requests to the banks that just had capital A's, like 100 capital A's in the URI. So it was real easy to block. And the banks quickly traded snort rules and all blocked it. And so then they had another one that was a better one and better attack as they gradually improved their attack. Until we go to conventions and we have the secret talks where you would learn the latest rules to block the latest attack. And they would try to keep it quiet as long as possible, so they could have some period of time of effective banking before the bad guys would upgrade their attack again. Anyway, so from the attacker's perspective, if you analyze the malware, you want to find some part of the malware that is going to be hard for them to fix. So for example, if they've already infected a bunch of machines with a previous version of the bot, it might not be easy for them to upgrade that. So you might be able to find some hard-coded string in an old version of the bot and trigger on that because they can't change it. And that's the thing. If you want to look for something that uses hard-coded strings on the client and the server, this is why one big example of this was, I've forgotten the name of it, but there was a malware family that infected about 10 years ago, infected something like 30 million Windows servers. And everybody freaked out and said, not only is it infected all these machines, but it had like version after version until they upgraded it like 6 times over a space of like 4 years. And everyone kept predicting something horrible is going to happen, but they never actually did any harm with it. They just infected all these machines, and apparently some kind of failure in the criminal ecosystem happened to where they never really sold it to anybody that would use it to steal passwords or perform an attack until the antivirus engines finally were upgraded to kick it off. But anyway, it was a big issue. And that's what goes on. That's why you get involved in threat actor analysis. That was Configure. Thank you very much. That was it, Configure. Because I remember well, the case of the boy who cries wolf, the security experts kept saying, on April, Configure is going to upgrade to the next version and there will be a disaster. And then nothing happened. And then in June, it's going to happen again. And like 4 times we predicted the end of the world and nothing ever happened. There were really like 30 million infected machines under hostile control, but the criminals didn't happen to do anything rotten with them. So anyway, all right. So here's some things you might look for. Can the network traffic be faster than the string analyzer? Yes, absolutely. And if you get a Juniper firewall, they will tell you that. They will warn you. They have special tricks to speed it up, and the same thing's true of Snort, and the same thing's true of Wireshark, by the way. All these tools do not really catch all the traffic. Also TCP dump. It is a big problem. All network scans, can only handle traffic up to a certain point, and if you run the traffic faster than that, they will skip packets and you will never know. So that's what got me. I did this contest where I was part of a team that actually won the black badge at DEF CON. I was in the network forensic contest, and my job was to try to reconstruct spoken traffic, which I knew how to do. And I couldn't understand any spoken traffic because we were dropping too many packets. And I think it was actually their network and not my analysis tool. But anyway, that's why it was kind of funny. I was on a team, and the other guy got like 1,200 points, and I only got like 50 points. And we won as a team because the job I was doing, I could not do on that network. The traffic was too messed up to hear the words. And the other guy was doing the other things and succeeded. Anyway, but that's the thing to know. All your network monitoring tools will only work up to a certain point, and then it'll skip traffic. Yeah. Anyway, so your job is to find something that is, not only not changing very much and hard to change, but also not very obvious, so you can get longer without getting caught, as both an attacker and a defender. Anyway, so I got another Kahoot about this. It's a good number. Looks suspicious. All right. All right, which API makes the malware developer write the most code? WinSock, the old one. You may remember this site called Two Cows. I don't know if it's still out there. The ultimate collection of WinSock software, the early generation of networked Windows software. Anyway. All right, which one is a field in an HTTP request header? All right, that's a user agent. All right, which one makes it difficult to identify a bot from its IP address? All right, and that's network address translation. All right, which API has Internet Open URL? All right, it's WinINet, and I suppose I should say which library. They're all technically part of the API anyway. All right. All right, SNP is a repeat winner. Terrace is a new one. And Forest, good. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording. Wait a minute, that's not quite what I wanted.